wed by duty. She hid her tears from the Duke, until his only touch awakened the warmth of her heart. The ballroom of Whitehaven Manor fell silent as Maristelle Quillen descended the grand staircase. Her cream-colored gown, adorned with modest embroidery, flowed around her like a gentle wave of surrender. The season's most illustrious families watched her every step, their expressions a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. She was, after all, the bride who had been sold to duty, a woman whose father's gambling debts had demanded the ultimate sacrifice. "Poor creature," whispered Lady Everley behind her fan. "Married to the Winter Duke. What a dreadful fate." The Winter Duke, Talion Grace, the Duke of Northaven, stood at the bottom of the staircase, his expression as unreadable as the ancient stone of his ancestral home. His imposing figure, clad in formal black, seemed to cast a shadow over the brightness of the occasion. The signet ring on his gloved hand glinted under the gaslight, a cold reminder of the power he wielded over her future. Maristelle kept her chin high, though her heart hammered against her ribs. 3 weeks had passed since their hasty wedding ceremony, a quiet, solemn affair attended only by those whose presence was legally necessary. 3 weeks of silence in the vast corridors of Northaven Hall, 3 weeks of separate chambers and cordial nods across breakfast tables. 3 weeks of a marriage that existed on paper and nowhere else. "Her Grace arrives without a single jewel," observed the Countess of Pembroke with barely concealed delight. "How austere." Indeed, Maristelle wore no ornaments, save for a simple copper leaf pendant, a curious gift from the Duke on their wedding night, presented with few words and even fewer explanations. It hung from a velvet ribbon around her neck, worthless by aristocratic standards, yet somehow precious to her lonely heart. As she reached the bottom step, the Duke extended his gloved hand toward her. The assembly watched with bated breath, eager to witness any hint of discord between the mismatched pair. "Your Grace," she murmured, placing her fingers lightly upon his palm. "Lady Northaven," he replied, his deep voice carrying just far enough for the nearest guests to hear. "You honor the assembly with your presence." The waltz began, and Maristelle felt herself guided to the dance floor with practiced precision. His hand at her waist maintained a respectful distance, neither possessive nor passionate. They moved in perfect coordination, two performers in a play staged for society's entertainment. "You have been crying," he observed quietly, his amber eyes fixed on a point above her head. Maristelle's breath caught. Had the telltale redness of her eyes betrayed her? She had been so careful, confining her tears to her pillow long after her lady's maid had retired. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I would not dishonor you with public displays." "I do not speak of public displays, madam. I speak of private sorrows." The orchestra swelled, but the music seemed to fade as his words pierced through her careful composure. For a moment, brief as the passing of a shadow, his gloved fingers tightened imperceptibly at her waist. "Am I such a monster that you must weep in secret?" he asked, his tone betraying a hint of something she could not quite name. Before she could answer, the music ceased, and he stepped away with a formal bow. The moment had passed, yet Maristelle stood transfixed, caught between relief at his withdrawal and a strange, unexpected longing for his return. The evening continued with painful propriety. Maristelle performed her duties as the Duchess of Northaven, smiling at appropriate moments, engaging in polite conversation, accepting condolences disguised as congratulations. The copper leaf pendant grew warm against her skin, a small comfort amid the whispers that followed her every move. "They say he hasn't shared her bed," hissed a matron to her companion, "that the marriage remains unconsummated. What else could one expect from the Winter Duke? They say his heart died with his first wife. Or perhaps the new Duchess simply fails to inspire warmer sentiments." Maristelle's fingers closed around the copper leaf, drawing strength from its simple form as laughter rippled through the group. She turned away, only to find herself face to face with a woman whose beauty seemed untouched by time, a woman whose emerald gaze held the sharpness of old wounds. "Lady Northaven," the woman said, her voice like honey poured over broken glass. "How delightful to make your acquaintance at last." "You have the advantage of me, madam," Maristelle replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "L'Eride Corm," the woman smiled, though the expression failed to reach her eyes. "An old friend of your husband's. I've just returned to London after many years abroad." The name struck Maristelle like a physical blow. Even in her sheltered existence, she had heard whispers of L'Eride Corm, the notorious beauty who had once been the object of the Duke's rare and profound devotion before scandal had torn them apart. "How fortunate that you could attend this evening." Maristelle managed to say, though her throat had gone dry. Leriday's gaze drifted to the copper pendant. Something flashed across her face. Recognition, perhaps, or a deeper emotion Maristelle could not decipher. "The copper leaf," Leriday said softly. "He gave it to you." "You recognize it?" Maristelle asked before she could stop herself. "I recognize what it means, my dear." Leriday's perfect lips curved into a smile that held secrets Maristelle feared to know. "The question is, do you?" Dawn broke over Northaven Hall, painting the ancient stone walls in hues of rose and gold. Maristelle stood at her chamber window, watching as the groundskeeper tended to the frost-bitten gardens below. Sleep had eluded her, chased away by the memory of Leriday Corm's enigmatic words and the weight of the copper pendant against her skin. "What does it mean?" she whispered, tracing the delicate veins of the leaf with her fingertip. "Why would he give such a thing to me?" A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Her lady's maid entered with a breakfast tray and a sealed letter bearing the Duke's crest. "His Grace requests your presence in the East Library at your earliest convenience, my lady," the maid said, setting down the tray. He emphasized there was no need to hurry. No need to hurry, as if Maristelle had pressing engagements to attend, as if her days were not endless exercises in solitude, punctuated only by meals and occasional stilted conversations. She broke the seal and unfolded the note, her eyes tracing the Duke's strong, elegant script. "Lady Northaven, certain matters require discussion. The East Library offers privacy. Northaven, formal, impersonal." Yet her heart quickened as she read the words a second time. What matters required discussion? Had her behavior at the ball displeased him? Had Leriday Corm's unexpected appearance altered their careful arrangement of mutual distance? Maristelle dressed with particular care, selecting a gown of soft moss green that complemented her honey gold hair and brought out the hazel flecks in her grey eyes. The copper pendant remained at her throat, a talisman against the uncertainty that awaited her. The East Library was the heart of Northaven Hall, a vast chamber lined with books from floor to ceiling, warmed by a perpetual fire and scented with leather and paper. The Duke stood by the tall windows, hands clasped behind his back, as he gazed out at the winter landscape. He turned at her entrance, and for a fleeting moment, something like approval crossed his austere features. "Lady Northaven," he greeted her with a formal bow. "I trust you rested well after the festivities." "As well as could be expected, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please be seated." He gestured toward a pair of wing-back chairs positioned near the hearth. "Would you care for tea?" The domesticity of the question struck her as oddly endearing. "Yes, thank you." He poured the tea himself rather than summoning a servant, a small detail that did not escape her notice. His movements were precise and graceful, at odds with the harshness often attributed to him by society gossips. "I must apologize for the unpleasantness you endured last evening," he said, handing her a delicate porcelain cup. "London society can be merciless to newcomers, particularly those who arrive under unusual circumstances." "You need not apologize, Your Grace. I was well prepared for their scrutiny." "Were you equally prepared for Leriday Corm's attendance?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Maristelle's fingers tightened around the cup. "I confess I was not. Nor was I." A shadow passed across his face. Her return to London was unexpected. "She recognized my pendant," Maristelle said, touching the copper leaf before she could stop herself. She implied it held some significance. The Duke's expression remained inscrutable, but his knuckles whitened as he set down his cup. "The pendant was presumptuous of me," he said after a moment's silence. "I should have explained its meaning when I presented it to you. Will you explain now, Your Grace?" He rose from his chair, moving to stand before the fire. The flames cast his features in sharp relief, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows, the unexpected vulnerability in his amber eyes. "Copper leaves were once crafted by a remote village in the north," he began, his deep voice taking on the cadence of a story long held close to the heart. "They were given not as symbols of possession, but as tokens of freedom." "Freedom?" Maristelle repeated, confused. "I don't understand." "The villagers believed that true bonds, those of loyalty, respect, and eventually, perhaps, affection, could only form when each person remained free to choose their path." He turned to face her fully. "The leaf represents that choice, but we had no choice in our marriage," she said softly. "It was arranged for us. The arrangement bound our names and fortunes, Lady Northaven. It need not bind your spirit." His gaze held hers with unexpected intensity. "I would not have you feel imprisoned by our union." Maristelle sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this revelation with the cold, distant figure society had painted him to be. The Winter Duke, offering freedom rather than demanding submission. It seemed impossible. "Why would you care for my comfort?" she asked at last, the question escaping before prudence could silence it. "Our marriage serves its purpose regardless of my contentment." A flicker of something, pain perhaps or regret, passed across his features. "I have known what it is to live without choice, madam. I would not inflict such a fate on another, least of all my wife." The word wife hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither seemed prepared to address. Maristelle's fingers found the copper leaf once more, drawing comfort from its smooth surface. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the pendant and for its meaning." He inclined his head, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You wear it well." The door to the library opened abruptly, admitting a flustered butler who held a silver tray with a single calling card. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but the lady was most insistent upon seeing you immediately." The Duke took the card, his expression darkening as he read the name embossed upon the thick paper. "Leride Corm," he said, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. "Here at Northaven Hall." Maristelle felt the temperature of the room drop, as if winter itself had crept through the doorway. The comfortable moment between them shattered, replaced by a tension that seemed to press against her chest. "Shall I send her away, Your Grace?" the butler asked, clearly hoping for an affirmative. The Duke's gaze met Maristelle's, a silent question in his eyes. To her own surprise, she found herself shaking her head slightly. "No," he said to the butler, though his eyes remained on Maristelle. "Show her to the blue drawing-room. Inform her that the Duchess and I will attend her shortly." The blue drawing-room of Northaven Hall had once been the favourite sanctuary of the previous Duchess. Paintings of serene coastlines adorned walls, covered in silk, the colour of a summer sky. Crystal decanters caught the winter light, casting prisms across the polished floor. It was a room designed for comfort, for intimate conversations, not for confrontations heavy with history and unspoken truths. Leride Corm stood by the grand piano, her emerald gown a deliberate contrast to the room's peaceful blues. She turned as the doors opened, her perfect composure faltering briefly at the sight of Maristelle entering alongside the Duke. "Talion," she said, addressing him by his given name with familiar ease. "And Lady Northaven. How generous of you both to receive me without prior notice." "What brings you to Northaven Hall, Miss Corm?" the Duke asked, forgoing pleasantries. His posture had changed subtly since leaving the library. Spine straighter, jaw tighter, the warmth Maristelle had glimpsed now carefully shuttered behind a mask of aristocratic indifference. Must one need a specific reason to call upon old friends? Leride's smile was practiced, brilliant, yet somehow hollow. "I merely wish to properly welcome your bride to society." Our conversation at the ball was cut regrettably short. "Your concern is noted," the Duke replied, his tone making it clear that her presence was neither expected nor particularly welcome, though I believe such courtesies are typically extended via correspondence rather than unannounced visits to private estates. Leride's smile faltered for an instant before returning with renewed determination. "Always so formal, Talion. One might think you were displeased to see me after all these years." Maristelle felt the air between them crackle with unspoken history. She stood slightly apart, uncertain of her place in this reunion, yet unwilling to abandon her husband to face it alone. "Time changes many things, Miss Corm," the Duke said evenly, "including the nature of acquaintances. And yet some things remain constant." Leride's gaze drifted to Maristelle, assessing her with the practiced eye of a strategist evaluating an opponent. "The copper leaf, for instance. A curious gift for a duchess, wouldn't you agree? So humble." The pendant seemed to grow heavier against Maristelle's skin. She resisted the urge to touch it, unwilling to give Leride the satisfaction of knowing her words had struck home. "I find its value lies not in its material worth," Maristelle replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice, "but in the sentiment it represents." "Sentiment?" Leride laughed, a brittle sound that echoed against the room's high ceiling. "My dear Lady Northaven, you speak of sentiment in relation to the Winter Duke. Society would find such a notion most amusing." "I find society's opinions on private matters to be of little consequence," Maristelle countered, emboldened by the subtle shift in the Duke's stance, a fractional movement toward her, a silent gesture of support. Leride's eyes narrowed, her practiced charm giving way to something sharper. "How refreshing to find such naivety in a woman of your position. Tell me, do you know why they call him the Winter Duke, Miss Corm?" The The Duke's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You forget yourself." "Do I?" Leredy challenged, taking a step toward him. "Or do I simply remember too well what others have chosen to forget?" The temperature in the room seemed to plummet further. Maristel watched as something unspoken passed between her husband and the beautiful visitor, some shared knowledge that hung in the air like frost. "If you have business with this household, state it plainly," the Duke said, his tone brooking no argument. "Otherwise, I must ask you to depart. The Duchess and I have matters requiring our attention." "Business?" "Yes, I suppose one could call it that." Leredy reached into a small reticule at her wrist, withdrawing a folded document sealed with wax. "I've come into possession of certain papers that may be of interest to you. Papers concerning your late brother." The Duke went utterly still, his expression freezing into a mask of rigid control. "My brother has been dead these 15 years. His reputation, however, lives on, as does the question of how he came to such an untimely end." Leredy held out the document, her delicate fingers gripping it with the confidence of one who knows precisely the value of what they hold. "These contain information that could bring that night back to public attention, information that could prove uncomfortable for the esteemed House of Grace. You dare to come here with threats?" The Duke's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Not threats, Talion. Opportunities." Leredy's gaze slid to Maristel, a cold smile playing at her lips. "An opportunity to protect your new bride from the scandal that could engulf her, should certain truths come to light." Maristel felt a chill run down her spine. What truths could be so damaging? What darkness lurked in the Duke's past that this woman could use as a weapon against him? "What do you want, Leredy?" the Duke asked, the use of her given name a concession that seemed to cost him dearly. "A simple arrangement. Financial support to restore my position in society, and your public endorsement to ensure doors that have been closed to me these many years might open once more." She paused, her expression softening into something almost wistful. "And perhaps in time, a renewal of our friendship." The implication hung in the air, unmistakable and provocative. Maristel felt her chest tighten, an unfamiliar emotion washing over her, not jealousy precisely, but something adjacent to it, a sense of trespass, of boundaries being deliberately transgressed. "You speak of friendship, yet you come bearing blackmail," the Duke observed coldly. "These are not the actions of a friend, Leredy. They are the actions of a woman who has survived the consequences of your family's influence," Leredy countered, her composure slipping to reveal a flash of genuine bitterness. "While you remained protected by title and fortune, I was cast out, ruined. Is it so unreasonable that I should seek restitution?" Before the Duke could respond, Maristel stepped forward, her decision made in a moment of clarity that surprised even herself. "Miss Combe," she said, her voice calm despite the rapid beating of her heart, "whatever history exists between you and my husband, whatever grievances you believe warrant this approach, surely there are more honorable means of resolution?" Leredy turned to her with narrowed eyes. "Honor? My dear, when one has lost everything, honor becomes an unaffordable luxury. Yet dignity remains priceless," Maristel replied, "and cannot be purchased through coercion." The Duke's hand moved slightly, his fingers brushing against Maristel's in a touch so light it might have been accidental, yet in that brief contact she felt a current of warmth pass between them, a silent acknowledgement that left her momentarily breathless. Leredy did not miss the gesture. Her eyes widened fractionally, something like genuine surprise flashing across her features before her mask of cool calculation returned. "How touching," she remarked, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I shall leave you to consider my proposal. The document remains yours to examine." She placed the sealed paper on a side table. "I shall call again in 3 days' time to hear your decision." With a rustle of silk and a lingering scent of exotic perfume, she departed, leaving behind a silence heavy with unasked questions and unspoken fears. The Duke moved to the window, his profile sharp against the winter light. "You should not have involved yourself," he said at last, his voice low. "Leredy Combe is not a woman to be underestimated." "She threatened my husband in my presence," Maristel replied with unexpected firmness. "Did you expect me to remain silent?" He turned to look at her, genuine surprise evident in his expression. "Most women in your position would distance themselves from such unpleasantness." "Perhaps I am not most women, Your Grace." For a moment, brief as the space between heartbeats, something almost like a smile touched his lips. "No," he agreed quietly. "You are not." The sealed document lay untouched on the Duke's desk as darkness fell over Northaven Hall, Rain lashed against the windows, a fitting accompaniment to the storm of uncertainty that had descended upon the household. Maristelle sat in a chair opposite her husband, watching as he stared at the offending paper with an intensity that might have reduced it to ashes. "Will you not read it?" she asked finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since Leride's departure. "To do so would validate her tactics," he replied, his voice tight with restrained emotion. "I will not give her that satisfaction." "Yet you must know what accusation she intends to make," Maristelle reasoned. "How can you defend against that which remains unexamined?" The Duke's amber eyes lifted to meet hers, surprise evident in their depths. "You speak as if we face this challenge together. Are we not husband and wife?" The words emerged with more conviction than she had intended. "Whatever threatens your name threatens mine as well." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks dancing upward. The Duke's expression softened almost imperceptibly in the flickering light. "Are you entered this marriage under duress, Lady Northaven? I would not compound that injustice by entangling you in the darker chapters of my family's history." "I entered this marriage with open eyes," she countered, her fingers absently touching the copper leaf at her throat. "And I wear your token of freedom. Allow me the dignity of choosing my own entanglements." For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then, with a deliberate movement, he reached for the document, breaking the seal with one decisive motion. His eyes scanned the contents, his expression growing grimmer with each passing second. When he had finished, he passed the papers to Maristelle without comment. The elegant script detailed events from 15 years prior, the night when Reginald Graced, the Duke's younger brother, had been found dead at the bottom of Northaven's East Tower. The official determination had been suicide, a tragedy attributed to melancholia and excessive drink. Leride's document, however, painted a far more sinister picture, an accusation of fratricide, alleging that Talion had confronted his brother after discovering Reginald's dishonorable conduct toward a certain young woman, Leride herself. "This is preposterous," Maristelle breathed, looking up from the pages. "Surely no one would believe such an account." "Scandal thrives on the flimsiest of evidence," the Duke replied wearily, "particularly when the accused has a reputation for coldness. But there must have been an investigation at the time. Witnesses, testimony. There was. The magistrate found no grounds for suspicion." His hands clenched briefly before relaxing with visible effort. "But Leride was close to both my brother and myself in those days. Her insinuation that she possesses new evidence could reopen old wounds and resurrect long-silenced whispers." Maristelle set the document aside, her mind racing. "What truly happened that night, Your Grace? If I am to stand with you, I must know the truth." The Duke rose, moving to stand before the fire. For a long moment he remained silent, his profile etched against the dancing flames. When he spoke, his voice held a quality she had not heard before, a raw honesty stripped of aristocratic reserve. "My brother was not a kind man, Lady Northaven. He possessed charm in abundance but lacked the character to wield it honorably. Leride was young, ambitious and captivated by the attention of two sons of a ducal house. His shoulders tensed beneath the fine fabric of his coat. Reginald compromised her. When she sought marriage to salvage her reputation, he spurned her cruelly. I discovered them arguing on the tower's balcony. Words were exchanged, harsh, unforgivable words. I left them to their quarrel and retired to the library. And later, he was found dead upon the stones below." The Duke turned to face her, his expression haunted. "I did not push him, Maristelle, but in leaving him there in his rage and his cups, I may well have sealed his fate." The use of her given name, the first time he had spoken it, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening's chill. "You blame yourself," she observed softly. "As does Leride. She believes I abandoned her to ruin, first by failing to prevent Reginald's actions, then by failing to save him, and finally by failing to marry her myself after his death." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Society, of course, concluded that I had used the scandal as an excuse to rid myself of an inconvenient brother and an unwanted suitor. Hence the name, the Winter Duke. Indeed." He returned to his seat, his movements betraying a weariness that seemed to come from the soul rather than the body. "Now you understand the nature of the shadow that hangs over Northaven Hall. I would not blame you for wishing distance from such darkness." Maristelle considered his words carefully, weighing the gravity of the situation against the growing certainty in her heart. "What will you do about Leride's demands? What would you have me do?" he asked, the question surprisingly genuine. "I would not have you surrender to extortion," she replied without hesitation, "nor would I have you suffer alone under false accusations. Something kindled in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or the faintest spark of hope. "You speak of suffering alone, as if I intend to stand beside you," she finished for him. "I do, Your Grace. Not from obligation, but from choice." The silence that followed held none of the awkwardness of their previous encounters. Instead, it seemed charged with a new awareness, a tentative connection formed in the face of shared adversity. "Talion," he said finally, "if we are to face this together, you must call me Talion." "Talion," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate upon her lips. "And I am Maristel, not Lady Northaven, at least when we are alone." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his features. "Very well, Maristel. We shall meet Lerida's challenge together, but the hour grows late, and tomorrow will bring decisions requiring clear minds." As if summoned by his words, a clap of thunder shook the windows, and the rain intensified its assault upon the glass. Maristel rose from her chair, strangely reluctant to end this unexpected moment of connection. "Until tomorrow, then," she said, moving toward the door. "Until tomorrow." He stood as she passed, his hand reaching out to catch hers in a brief, gentle clasp. "And thank you." The warmth of his touch lingered long after she had retired to her chambers, a sensation both unsettling and oddly comforting in the darkness of the stormy night. Morning brought no respite from the previous day's storm. Rain continued to batter Northaven Hall, transforming the manicured gardens into sodden expanses of green and the gravel pathways into miniature rivers. Maristel stood at the breakfast table, a letter from her father clutched in her hand, its contents adding to the tempest that had taken residence in her heart. "Troubling news?" Talion inquired as he entered the morning room, his keen gaze noting her distress immediately. "My father writes that rumors have already begun to circulate in London," she replied, extending the letter for his inspection. "Lerida has wasted no time in laying the groundwork for her scheme." He scanned the letter quickly, his expression darkening with each line. These whispers of renewed interest in Reginald's death, coupled with insinuations about my character, she has been most efficient. The timing is particularly cruel, with the Havisham's ball approaching next week. All of society will be watching us, measuring every interaction for signs of discord. Maristel reclaimed the letter, folding it with deliberate precision. "My father suggests we present a united front, a display of connubial harmony to counter the emerging narrative." "A sensible strategy," Talion agreed, though his tone suggested reservations. "Yet such performances rarely withstand close scrutiny. Society has a remarkable talent for detecting falsity in affection." Maristel hesitated, uncertain how to navigate the delicate terrain between pragmatic alliance and the more complex emotions beginning to stir within her. "Then perhaps we should not perform at all." His eyebrow raised in question. "What do you propose instead? That we simply know one another?" She met his gaze steadily, though her heart fluttered like a caged bird. "We have been married nearly a month, yet remain strangers in all but name. Perhaps the best defense against Lerida's machinations is not a contrived display but an authentic understanding." A strange expression crossed his features, something akin to wonder, quickly masked by his customary reserve. "You suggest we court after the wedding. A most unconventional approach." "Our entire union has been unconventional, Yorgar." "Talion," she reminded him, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "What harm could come from continuing in that vein?" The faintest answering smile appeared on his face, transforming his severe countenance in a way that caused her breath to catch. "Very well. Let us begin our belated courtship. Would you care to accompany me to the conservatory? I believe the rain makes it especially worth visiting today." The conservatory occupied the east wing of Northaven Hall, a cathedral of glass and iron housing botanical treasures from across the empire. As they entered, the sound of rain upon the glass dome created a symphony overhead, while the humid air embraced them with the scents of earth and exotic blooms. "This is magnificent," Maristel breathed, taking in the profusion of colors and textures that defied the gray English winter beyond the glass. "I had no idea such a wonder existed within Northaven." "It was my mother's creation," Talion explained, guiding her along a narrow path between towering palms. "She found English winters intolerable and created her own perpetual summer. She must have been a remarkable woman." She was, determined, passionate, unwilling to accept the limitations others would impose upon her. His voice held a warmth she had not heard before. "You would have liked her, I think, and she would have approved of you." The unexpected compliment brought a flush to Maristel's cheeks. "You cannot possibly know that." "Can I not?" He paused beside a flowering vine, its star-shaped blooms a delicate shade of blue. She valued authenticity above all else. Your refusal to bow to convention, your willingness to face unpleasant truths rather than hide behind comfortable illusions, these would have earned her respect. Maristel's fingers reached out to touch one of the blossoms, its petals velvet soft against her skin. "You speak as if you know me well, sir, when we have scarcely begun our acquaintance." "Perhaps I have observed more than you realize," he replied, his voice dropping to a tone that sent a curious warmth cascading through her veins. "The way you maintain dignity amid whispers, your kindness to the servants, your habit of touching the copper leaf when gathering your courage, these small truths reveal character more honestly than any formal introduction." She turned to him in surprise, disconcerted by his perception and moved by the attentiveness it revealed. "And what character do these observations suggest to you?" "One of quiet strength, resilience, a capacity for joy despite circumstances that might crush a lesser spirit." His amber eyes held hers with unexpected intensity. "You are not what I expected when our marriage was arranged, Maristel." "Nor are you," she admitted, the honesty of the moment demanding equal candor from her. "The winter duke of society's telling bears little resemblance to the man who builds conservatories and offers copper leaves as tokens of freedom." A shadow passed across his face. "I have earned my reputation in many ways. My treatment of Leridae alone was a consequence of impossible circumstances," she interjected gently. "You cannot bear responsibility for every painful outcome, Talion." "Cannot I?" His gaze drifted to the rain streaming down the glass panels above them. "My brother's death, Leridae's ruin, even our marriage, a union forced upon you to satisfy your father's debts. All consequences that flow in some measure from my actions or inaction." Maristel stepped closer, moved by the burden of guilt she heard in his voice. "You carry too much, my lord. Not all pain in this world belongs to you, yet much that touches Northaven does." His eyes returned to hers, searching, "Including yours." "My pain predates our marriage," she said softly, "and has eased, not worsened, since coming to Northaven." Surprise flickered across his features. "How can that be? You have left all that is familiar, been thrust into a household of strangers, married to a man known for his coldness." "A man who has shown me only consideration," she corrected him, "who offered freedom when he might have demanded submission, who seeks to know me when he might simply command me." Her hand moved unconsciously to the copper pendant. "The tears I shed were never for what I found at Northaven, but for what I left behind, a home where I was valued only for the alliance my marriage might secure." Talion's expression softened, understanding dawning in his eyes. "And yet you still defend your father in society." "Of course, he is my father despite his failings," she smiled ruefully. "Just as you are my husband, despite the whispers that surround your name." Something shifted in the air between them, a subtle recalibration of understanding, a new awareness charged with possibilities neither had anticipated. Talion's hand moved hesitantly, as if to touch her face, before dropping back to his side. "You honor me with the loyalty I have done little to earn," he said, his voice rough with emotion he seemed unaccustomed to expressing. "Perhaps loyalty, like affection, need not always be earned," she replied. "Sometimes it is simply given." The word affection hung between them, neither acknowledged nor dismissed. Rain drummed against the glass, creating a world apart from society's judgments and expectations, a sanctuary where truth might flourish like the exotic blooms surrounding them. "Maristel," he began, then hesitated, seeming to struggle for words that had long gone unused. Before he could continue, the conservatory door opened to admit the butler, his formal demeanor at odds with the lush surroundings. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Miss Corm has arrived again. She insists upon seeing you immediately and refuses to depart without an audience." The fragile moment shattered. Talion's expression hardened, the warmth that had begun to emerge once again sealed behind a wall of aristocratic reserve. "Inform Miss Corm that the Duchess and I are not at home to visitors today," he instructed, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I attempted to convey as much, Your Grace, but she was most insistent. She claims to have information that cannot wait until her appointed return in 2 days' time." Maristel placed her hand lightly on Talion's arm, feeling the tension that radiated from him. "Perhaps we should hear what she has to say. Forewarned is forearmed, after all." He looked down at her hand, then met her eyes with a gaze that contained equal parts resignation and resolve. "Very well. Show her to the morning room, Barrows. The Duchess and I shall attend her presently." Lady Corm paced the morning room like a captive predator, her crimson gown a stark contrast to the room's subdued elegance. She turned sharply at their entrance, her practiced smile failing to conceal the calculation in her eyes. "How kind of you both to receive me on such short notice," she began, her gaze lingering on Maristel's hand, which still rested lightly upon Talion's arm. "Though I see I may have interrupted a domestic idyll." "How touching." "State your purpose, Lady," Talion said, forgoing pleasantries. "What matter is so urgent that it cannot wait the 2 days you yourself stipulated?" "A simple courtesy call, Talion. News travels quickly in London, and I thought it only fair to warn you of the latest developments." She withdrew a folded newspaper from her reticule, extending it with a dramatic flourish. "This morning's edition makes for most interesting reading." Talion took the paper, unfolding it to reveal a gossip column prominently displayed. Maristel read over his shoulder, her heart sinking as she absorbed the carefully worded insinuations. Society observers note with interest the return of the mysterious LC to London circles after an extended absence abroad. Sources close to the lady suggest her return coincides with renewed inquiries into the tragic demise of Reginald Graced, brother to the current Duke of Northaven. The circumstances of the young gentleman's fatal fall have long been the subject of discreet speculation in certain quarters. One wonders how the Duke's new bride, a marriage arranged with suspicious haste, might receive such unsettling revelations about her husband's past associations. "A masterful piece of character assassination," Talion observed, his tone icily calm despite the color that had drained from his face. "Vague enough to avoid libel, yet pointed enough to inflict maximum damage. Your work, I presume." "I merely provided a few historical details to a writer eager for society intrigue," Leriday replied with feigned innocence. "The public has such an appetite for the private affairs of the aristocracy, particularly when they involve such colorful elements." Maristel stepped forward, her voice steady despite the anger flaring within her. "You speak of my husband's pain, of his brother's death, as if it were entertainment for the masses. Have you no decency, Miss Corm?" "Decency?" Leriday laughed, the sound brittle as breaking glass. "My dear Lady Northaven, decency is a luxury afforded to those who remain within society's good graces. I was denied that privilege 15 years ago, when your husband chose his reputation over justice. That is not what happened, and you know it," Talion replied, his restraint visibly fraying. "I offered you protection, financial support, a chance to rebuild away from scandal." "You offered charity!" Leriday's composure cracked, revealing the raw wound beneath her polished exterior. "When what I deserved was marriage, position, vindication. Instead, you retreated behind these walls, leaving me to bear the full weight of society's judgment alone. And now you return to claim your pound of flesh," Maristel observed quietly, "regardless of who might be wounded in the process." Leriday turned to her, eyes glittering with a dangerous light. "You know nothing of wounds, child. You, who walked from your father's home into a duchy without missing a step. What do you know of being cast out, of watching doors close in your face, of hearing your name become synonymous with disgrace? I know enough of suffering to recognize its callous infliction upon others," Maristel replied, maintaining her composure, though her heart raced. "And I know that true justice cannot be purchased through extortion." A tense silence followed her words. Leriday's gaze darted between them, assessing, recalculating. Whatever she observed in their united stance seemed to give her pause. "I see the Duke has found a more formidable advocate than anticipated," she said finally, her tone shifting to one of grudging respect. "Perhaps you are not the meek sacrifice I assumed, Lady Northaven." "My wife is many things, Leriday, but meek has never been among them," Talion said, the unexpected defense bringing warmth to Maristel's cheeks. "Now, having delivered your warning, you may take your leave. Whatever game you play, we shall not be moved by threats or gossip." Leriday collected her reticule, preparing to depart, but paused at the door. "Consider carefully before you dismiss my proposal, Talion. This column is but a whisper compared to the storm I can unleash. 2 days remain before I require your answer, 2 days in which to weigh reputation against pride." Her gaze drifted to Maristel. "Ask yourself if your new bride is prepared for the scrutiny that will follow, should you choose defiance over discretion." With that parting thrust, she swept from the room, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and the heavier weight of her threats. Talion moved to the window, his reflection in the rain-streaked glass revealing a face carved from stone. "She will not stop. This is merely the opening gambit in a campaign designed to force my capitulation." Then we must prepare our own counter-moves, Maristel replied, joining him at the window. The Havisham's ball provides an opportunity to present our own narrative before society, to demonstrate that we stand united against such baseless insinuations. He turned to her, his expression softening with something like wonder. You continue to surprise me, Maristel. Most women would be demanding explanations, contemplating separation, perhaps even believing the worst. I am not most women, she reminded him, a smile touching her lips despite the gravity of their situation, and I have already chosen which truth to believe. Have you indeed? His voice dropped lower, his gaze intensifying in a way that sent a curious heat cascading through her veins. I have. Her hand moved unconsciously to the copper leaf at her throat, drawing strength from its simple form. I believe in the man who offered freedom rather than demanding submission, who faces his demons with courage rather than evasion, who carries guilt for tragedies he did not cause because his conscience will permit nothing less. Something broke in his expression then, a dam long held against vulnerability, against hope. His hand rose to cover hers where it rested on the pendant, his touch sending a tremor through her that had nothing to do with fear. Maristel, he said, her name a prayer on his lips. I do not deserve such faith. Perhaps it is not a matter of deserving, she replied softly. Perhaps it is simply a truth that exists, like rain or sunlight or the changing of seasons. The distance between them seemed to diminish, the air growing heavy with unspoken possibility. His eyes dropped to her lips for a heartbeat, before returning to meet her gaze with an intensity that left her breathless. If I were a different man, a better man, he began. You are the man you are, she interrupted gently, and I would have you no other way. The moment hung between them, fragile and perfect, a crystal suspended in time. Then, with infinite care, Talion raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that burned like a brand upon her skin. Then let us face what comes together, he said, his voice rough with emotion, not as strangers bound by contract, but as allies who have chosen their path freely. Allies, she echoed, the word both a promise and a question. His fingers tightened fractionally around hers. For now, unless... A knock at the door interrupted whatever might have followed, as a footman entered bearing an urgent message from London. The spell broken, they stepped apart, returning to the practical concerns that demanded their attention. But something had shifted between them. A door opened that could never again be fully closed. As Talion read the message with furrowed brow, Maristel touched the place on her palm where his lips had pressed, the sensation lingering like a secret written on her skin. Whatever storms Leridicorm might unleash, whatever society might whisper behind gloved hands, Maristel knew with sudden clarity that she would weather it all gladly for the chance to discover what lay beyond the word allies in the amber depths of Talion-graced eyes. The Havisham's ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles, their light reflected in gilded mirrors, and the jewels adorning London's elite. Music swelled from the orchestra dais, providing a graceful backdrop to the more cutthroat symphony of social politics being conducted across the polished floor. Maristel stood at the entrance, her hand resting lightly on Talion's arm, acutely aware of the speculative glances and hastily concealed whispers that greeted their arrival. Every eye in the room, she murmured, maintaining her composed smile. One might think we were players in a theatrical production rather than guests at a social gathering. In many ways, we are precisely that, Talion replied, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Society delights in nothing more than a performance of scandal and redemption. Tonight, we merely offer them a different script than the one they anticipated. Indeed, they had planned their entrance with strategic precision. Maristel wore a gown of deep sapphire blue that complemented her honey-gold hair and creamy complexion, while showcasing the ducal diamonds that Talion had presented to her that very morning, an undeniable statement of his esteem. The copper leaf remained at her throat, now nestled against the glittering necklace like a secret shared between them. Lady Northaven, your grace. Lady Havisham descended upon them with practiced enthusiasm, though her eyes gleamed with barely concealed curiosity. How delightful that you could attend. We had heard the most distressing rumors of indisposition at Northaven Hall. Nothing more serious than a spring cold, I assure you, Talion replied smoothly, his hand covering Maristel's where it rested on his arm, a gesture of intimacy that did not go unnoticed by their hostess. My wife's constitution, much like her spirit, proves remarkably resilient. Lady Havisham's gaze darted between them, clearly reassessing whatever narrative she had previously constructed. Indeed, How fortunate for you both. The first months of marriage can be so challenging, particularly when circumstances are unusual. I have found, Lady Havisham, that unusual circumstances often yield the most rewarding outcomes, Maristelle replied, matching the older woman's tone of polite insinuation. The Duke and I have discovered much to appreciate in our union. The subtle emphasis on appreciate sent a flicker of color to Talion's cheeks, a reaction that delighted Maristelle, even as it intensified her own awareness of the shifting nature of their relationship. The past 3 days had brought a gradual thawing between them, each conversation venturing further into territory that transcended mere alliance. The kiss upon her palm remained unmentioned, yet ever present, a silent acknowledgement of possibilities neither had yet found the courage to name. "How charming," Lady Havisham murmured, clearly disappointed by their united front. "You must circulate, of course. Lord Pembroke was most eager to renew his acquaintance with you, Your Grace. Something about investments in the northern properties, I believe." As their hostess drifted away to greet other guests, Talion leaned closer to Maristelle, his breath warm against her ear. "The first skirmish ends in our favor, it seems." "The evening is young," she reminded him, though she could not suppress a smile. "And Lady Havisham is merely the vanguard of curiosity, not its general. Then we shall face each battalion as it arrives." His amber eyes held a warmth that belied his reputation. "Beginning with the waltz. I believe the orchestra prepares for one now." The dance floor cleared as couples took their positions. Talion led Maristelle to the center, placing one hand at her waist while the other clasped hers with gentle firmness. The music began, and they moved together with a harmony that belied their brief acquaintance, as if their bodies had discovered a language that transcended the constraints of their unusual courtship. "You dance beautifully," Maristelle observed, finding herself breathless from more than just the exertion of the waltz. "As do you." His gaze never left hers, creating the impression that they moved within a private world, despite the hundreds of eyes following their every step. "Though I confess, I find myself distracted by matters beyond mere footwork." "Such as?" she prompted, her heart quickening at the intensity in his expression. "Such as the remarkable woman in my arms, who faces scandal and whispers with unfailing grace, who sees beyond the winter duke to the man beneath the frost." His fingers tightened fractionally against her waist. "Who makes me question whether duty might, against all expectations, lead to something resembling happiness." The word hung between them, shimmering with possibility. Maristelle felt as though she stood upon the edge of a precipice, uncertain whether the fall would bring destruction or flight. "Happiness," she echoed softly. "A bold aspiration for a marriage founded on obligation." "Perhaps not so bold," he countered, guiding her through a turn that brought them momentarily closer together. "Not when one considers how thoroughly you have transformed Northaven Hall from a mausoleum of memories into something approaching a home." Before she could respond, the music concluded, and they parted with the customary bow and curtsy. Applause rippled across the ballroom, yet Maristelle sensed that it celebrated more than just the dance. It acknowledged the surprising tableau they presented, the Winter Duke and his bride, not merely tolerating each other's company, but seemingly drawn to it. As they left the dance floor, Maristelle became aware of a disturbance near the entrance. Heads turned, whispers intensified, and a path cleared through the crowd to reveal Lady Combe, resplendent in emerald silk that emphasized the vivid color of her eyes. Her entrance had clearly been calculated for maximum impact, timed to coincide with the conclusion of Talion and Maristelle's waltz. "Courage, my dear," Talion murmured, his hand pressing reassuringly against the small of Maristelle's back. "The second battalion approaches." Lady made her way toward them with deliberate grace, acknowledging greetings with regal nods, while maintaining her focus on the ducal couple. When she reached them, she dipped into a flawless curtsy, her eyes never leaving Talion's face. "Your Grace," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to ensure that those nearby could hear every word. "How delightful to see you in such domestic contentment. And Lady Northaven, radiant as ever. The ducal diamonds suit you admirably, though I note you still wear that curious copper trinket beneath them. Sentiment, I presume." "Indeed, Miss Combe," Maristelle replied with perfect composure. "Some gifts carry value beyond their material worth." How charmingly rustic a perspective. Lady's smile did not reach her eyes, though I wonder if such sentimentality will sustain you through the less picturesque aspects of life at Northaven. The Duke's temperament can prove challenging, as history has demonstrated. "History often suffers from incomplete narration," Talion observed, his tone deceptively mild. A fact you might consider before placing excessive faith in its lessons. Lerida's eyes narrowed fractionally. Speaking of history, Your Grace, I had hoped to continue our discussion from the other day. The deadline approaches, after all, and decisions must be made. Indeed they must, he agreed, his expression betraying nothing of the tension Maristel could feel radiating from him, though this is hardly the venue for such matters. On the contrary, Lerida countered, her voice dropping to a silken murmur, this seems precisely the appropriate setting. So many witnesses to observe the choices we make and their consequences. The threat hung in the air between them, unmistakable in its implication. For a moment, Maristel feared that Talion might surrender to anger, might provide the scene of discord that Lerida so clearly sought to provoke. Instead, he surprised her, and clearly Lerida as well, by smiling with genuine warmth and turning his gaze to Maristel. Speaking of witnesses, my dear, he said, his voice carrying just far enough to reach the circle of attentive listeners that had formed around them, I believe it is time we made our announcement. Maristel's heart skipped a beat, confusion momentarily clouding her thoughts. What announcement? They had planned their appearance carefully, but this deviation from their strategy left her momentarily adrift. Announcement, Lerida echoed, her practiced composure faltering for an instant. Talion took Maristel's hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that sent a flush of warmth cascading through her veins. Indeed, Lady Northaven and I had intended to wait until supper, but perhaps the moment has found us instead. Understanding dawned in Maristel's mind, not the specifics of what he intended to say, but the certainty that he sought to wrest control of the narrative from Lerida's grasp. She squeezed his hand lightly, a silent signal of trust and support. The Duchess and I, Talion announced, his voice pitched to carry naturally to the eagerly listening crowd, are pleased to share that Northaven Hall will open its doors this summer for a charity exhibition to benefit the Foundling Hospital. Lady Northaven has proposed that our extensive gardens and art collection be made accessible to those who purchase tickets, with all proceeds dedicated to the care of children without families. A murmur of approval rippled through the assembly. Charity work, particularly that which involved the opening of private estates, represented the highest form of aristocratic virtue in the eyes of society. The announcement transformed the narrative instantly, from whispers of scandal and discord to admiration for noble philanthropy. How commendable, Lerida managed, though her expression suggested she found it anything but. Though I wonder if such public exposure is wise, given recent discussions. On the contrary, Miss Corm, Maristel replied, warming to Talion's strategy. The Duke and I believe that openness is the surest defense against misunderstanding. Northaven has nothing to hide, neither in its halls nor in its history. The pointed remark struck home. Lerida's lips tightened, her eyes glittering with barely suppressed fury. Before she could formulate a response, Lady Havisham swooped in, eager to associate herself with the suddenly virtuous project. "What a splendid initiative!" she exclaimed, effectively separating Lerida from the ducal couple. "You must tell me all the details, Lady Northaven. The Havisham Foundation would be delighted to offer patronage to such a worthy cause." As they were drawn into conversation with their hostess and other interested parties, Maristel felt Talion's hand settle at the small of her back, a touch that communicated both gratitude and something deeper, something that made her heart race despite the crowded setting. "Well played," she murmured, when they had a moment of relative privacy. "I merely followed your lead," he replied, his voice low and intimate. "The charity exhibition was your suggestion, after all, though intended for next year rather than this summer." "A small acceleration in the timeline seems a worthwhile sacrifice," she observed with a smile, "particularly when it serves to confound those who would see us divided." His amber eyes held hers with an intensity that made the crowded ballroom fade around them. "There are many sacrifices I would make willingly to prevent that outcome, Maristel. More than I had ever thought possible before you came to Northaven." The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither had yet dared to fully acknowledge. Before she could respond, they were drawn back into the social current of the ball, but the warmth of his words remained. A flame kindled against the gathering storm. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold as the carriage bearing the Duke and Duchess of Northaven departed London for the journey home. Maristel leaned against the velvet cushions, fatigue and elation mingling in equal measure. The Havisham's ball had continued until the small hours, culminating in a triumph neither she nor Talion had fully anticipated. "Lady Pembroke has already formed a committee," she observed, smiling at the memory. And Lord Westmoreland offered his musicians for the exhibition opening. By morning, the charity event will be the talk of London, overshadowing any whispers Leride might have hoped to cultivate. A masterful diversion, Talion agreed, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. Though I fear we have created a substantial obligation for ourselves in the process. Opening North Haven to the public will require considerable preparation. Are you concerned? She asked, studying his face in the gentle light of early morning. Not concerned, he replied thoughtfully, merely adjusting to the notion of North Haven as a place of light and activity rather than solitude and shadow. It has been many years since the hall welcomed visitors in any significant number. Maristel hesitated, then reached across the space between them to touch his hand lightly. If you truly object, we might find another way to— No. His fingers captured hers, warm and reassuring. The time for shadows has passed, I think. You have brought light back to North Haven, Maristel. It seems only fitting that others should witness the transformation. The simple statement carried a weight that transcended the matter of the charity exhibition, and Maristel felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. The events of the previous evening had shifted something fundamental between them. A boundary crossed, though the territory beyond remained largely unexplored. What do you suppose Leride will do now? She asked, partly to redirect the conversation towards safer ground. Her plan to isolate us socially has clearly failed. Talion's expression darkened slightly. Leride is not one to admit defeat easily. I fear she may abandon subtlety for more direct methods of attack. The documents she claims to possess regarding your brother's death, yes. Though their veracity is questionable, the mere suggestion of new evidence could reopen wounds best left to heal. His thumb traced absent patterns against her palm, an unconscious intimacy that sent gentle shivers along her arm. I have written to my solicitor requesting a meeting upon our return. Legal preparation seems prudent. Then we shall face whatever comes together, Maristel assured him, the words a reflection of the promise they had made days earlier. His amber eyes softened as they met hers. Your loyalty continues to astonish me. Most women would have sought distance from such unpleasantness, perhaps a convenient visit to distant relatives until the storm passed. Most women have not had the opportunity to discover what lies beneath the winter duke's frost, she replied with a small smile. Something kindled in his gaze, a warmth that belied his notorious title. And what have you discovered, Maristel? The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Maristel felt her heart quicken, aware that her answer might irrevocably alter the delicate balance they had achieved. A man of principle, she began softly, of honor and unexpected gentleness. A man who offers freedom rather than demanding submission, who bears the weight of others' actions as if they were his own. She paused, gathering courage for the words that came next. A man I have grown to care for, despite the unusual circumstances of our union. Talion's breath caught audibly. For a moment he seemed transfixed, as if her words had rendered him momentarily incapable of movement or speech. Then, with deliberate care, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that echoed their earlier moment of connection, yet carried a new intensity. Maristel, he said, her name a benediction on his lips. The carriage lurched suddenly, cutting off his words as both were thrown forward. Outside, the driver shouted in alarm, and the vehicle came to an abrupt halt that sent Maristel tumbling against Talion's chest. His arms closed around her instinctively, protective and steadying. Are you hurt? He asked urgently, his hands moving to cradle her face as he searched for signs of injury. No, merely startled, she assured him, though her heart raced from the unexpected contact. What happened? Talion released her reluctantly and moved to open the carriage door. Wait here, he instructed, his expression shifting from tender concern to wary alertness. He descended to the road, his tall figure disappearing from view as Maristel gathered her scattered composure. The intimacy of their interrupted conversation still hummed in her veins, yet concern quickly overshadowed it as raised voices reached her from outside. Disregarding Talion's directive, she moved to the door and peered out. The scene that greeted her sent a chill down her spine. Their driver stood arguing with two rough-looking men who had positioned their cart across the narrow country lane, effectively blocking passage. A third man, partially concealed in the hedgerow, seemed to be circling toward the rear of their carriage. The morning mist clung to the fields on either side, creating an eerie backdrop to the confrontation. Talion's stance radiated controlled tension as he addressed the apparent leader of the group. Whatever your purpose, sir, I suggest you reconsider. Interfering with a peer's travel is a serious offence. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, the man replied, with exaggerated deference that bordered on mockery. We've no quarrel with you personally, just carrying out instructions like, got a message for you to consider, from a mutual acquaintance. I do not recall establishing acquaintance with highwaymen, Talion observed coldly. Move your cart and allow us to pass. The leader shook his head, a smile revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Can't do that until our business is concluded. The lady was most specific about ensuring you received her token of regard. Maristel's blood ran cold at the implication. Leridai. This was her response to the previous night's defeat. A direct message delivered through hired thugs on an isolated country road. If Miss Corm wishes to communicate with me, there are more conventional channels available, Talion said, his voice dangerously quiet. Conventional don't seem to be working for her, the man replied with a shrug. Said you'd understand once you saw what we brought. He gestured to his companion, who reached into the cart and withdrew a small wooden box. The sight of it caused Talion to stiffen visibly. That bears my brother's crest, he said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Sharp eye, Your Grace. The lady thought you'd recognize it. The man held out the box. She said to tell you this is just a sample of what she holds. Plenty more where this came from, all ready for public viewing unless her terms are met. Talion made no move to take the box. And those terms have changed, I presume? Given her failure to achieve her aims through society gossip. Smart as well as sharp-eyed, the leader acknowledged with a mocking bow. Double the original amount paid within the week. No more exhibitions or charity nonsense drawing attention to North Haven. And, he hesitated, glancing toward the carriage where Maristel stood watching, a public statement from Your Grace distancing yourself from certain allegations made against the lady's character 15 years past. Extortion upon extortion, Talion observed, his composure absolute despite the provocation. What guarantee would I have that these demands would be the last? The man laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet morning air. None whatsoever, I expect, but the lady was clear about the consequences of refusal. Your brother's letters, his diary, evidence that never made it to the magistrate's investigation, all to be published with copies sent to every noble house in London. Maristel could bear the exchange no longer. Gathering her skirts, she descended from the carriage to stand beside Talion, her head held high despite the fear that coursed through her veins. Your Grace, she said formally, for the benefit of their unwelcome audience, I believe we have tarried long enough. These men clearly have no understanding of the gravity of their actions, nor of the consequences that will follow. Talion's gaze met hers, surprise and admiration mingling in his expression. Indeed, my dear, though I fear our journey is momentarily impeded. A temporary inconvenience, she replied with more confidence than she felt. Turning to address the leader directly, she continued, You may inform Miss Corm that her message has been received, though not in the spirit she perhaps intended. The Duke of North Haven does not yield to threats, neither those delivered in ballrooms nor those presented on public highways. The man blinked, clearly taken aback by her intervention. The lady didn't mention you'd be speaking for His Grace, ma'am. The Duchess speaks with my full authority in this matter, Talion said, his hand finding hers in a gesture that conveyed both support and something deeper. Now, you will remove your cart from our path and return to your employer with this message. Whatever documents she possesses, genuine or fabricated, will not compel me to slander my own name or betray my conscience. She has until sunset to reconsider her course before I present this entire affair to the authorities. For a tense moment, it seemed the confrontation might escalate further. The third man had emerged from his position behind the carriage, his hand resting meaningfully on what appeared to be a concealed weapon. The leader assessed the ducal couple with narrowed eyes, weighing defiance against discretion. The lady won't be pleased, he said finally. That, sir, is a matter of profound indifference to me, Talion replied, his aristocratic bearing never more evident than in this moment of threat. Your decision, however, holds more immediate consequences. Choose wisely. Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the implicit promise of retribution, seemed to penetrate even the rough demeanor of their antagonist. With a curt nod to his companions, he stepped back. Move the cart, he ordered. We've delivered the message as paid to do. What comes after ain't our concern. As the men grudgingly cleared the path, Talion turned to Maristel, his expression a complex mixture of concern, admiration, and something that made her heart flutter beneath her ribs. That was either remarkably brave or exceedingly foolish, he said quietly. I had instructed you to remain in the carriage. "You married a woman, Your Grace, not a lapdog," she replied, though she softened the words with a small smile. "I could hardly cower while you faced such unpleasantness alone." His amber eyes darkened as they held hers. "No, indeed. You have never been one to cower, have you, Maristel? Not before society's whispers, not before Leride's schemes, and certainly not before common thugs on a country lane." His voice dropped lower, meant for her ears alone. "It is that courage, among many other qualities, that has made me realize how utterly insufficient the word care is to describe what has grown between us." Before she could respond to this remarkable declaration, he guided her back to the carriage with gentle firmness, aware that they remained under hostile observation. The wooden box, whatever its contents, had been placed on the seat opposite them. It sat like a malevolent presence, a physical manifestation of the past's intrusion upon their tentative present. As the carriage resumed its journey toward Northaven Hall, Maristel watched Talion's profile, noting the tension that had returned to his features as he contemplated Leride's latest move. Whatever understanding had begun to blossom between them now faced a more tangible threat, one that would demand resolution before they could explore the sentiment he had begun to express before their interruption. "We will overcome this," she said softly, placing her hand over his. "Together." His fingers interlaced with hers, a silent acknowledgement of her promise. "Together," he echoed, the single word carrying the weight of both commitment and unexpected hope. The solicitor departed Northaven Hall as dusk settled over the estate, leaving Talion and Maristel alone in the library with the contents of Reginald's box spread before them. Letters, journal entries, sketches, fragments of a life cut short, carefully preserved, and now weaponized by a woman consumed by bitterness. "Mr. Hadley seems confident that Leride has overplayed her hand," Maristel observed, gathering the scattered papers into a neat pile. "These documents contain nothing that would substantiate accusations against you." "Perhaps not in a court of law," Talion agreed, his expression troubled as he closed Reginald's journal with gentle reverence. "But the court of public opinion requires no evidence beyond suggestion. These intimate glimpses into my brother's thoughts, his descent into jealousy and despair, Leride knows their publication would resurrect painful speculations, regardless of their legal implications." Maristel studied his face in the fading light, noting the weariness that had settled upon him during their examination of Reginald's private writings. "You still blame yourself for his death." It was not a question, but he answered nonetheless. "How can I not? His final entry speaks of confronting me, of demanding that I acknowledge my interference in his affairs. I remember that night, Maristel, his anger, his accusations. I dismissed him as drunk and unstable. Had I stayed, had I listened? Had you been omniscient and infallible, you mean?" she challenged gently. "Talion, you were not responsible for your brother's choices, however tragic their outcome. A comforting sentiment, but one that changes nothing." He moved to the window, his profile etched against the twilight sky. "Reginald is gone. Leride was ruined, and now she returns to exact payment for debts I cannot deny owing." Maristel joined him at the window, her reflection appearing beside his in the darkening glass. "What will you do? What would you have me do?" he asked, turning to face her directly. "Pay her demands? Make a public statement absolving her of responsibility in a scandal long since faded from memory? Or defy her and watch as she drags Northaven, and you, through the mire of renewed gossip and speculation?" "I would have you do what your conscience dictates," she replied without hesitation, "not what fear suggests." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Even if my conscience leads to your discomfort? To having your name linked with scandal before you have even properly established yourself in society? Even then," she met his gaze steadily, "I did not marry your title, Talion. I married you, or at least, I have come to embrace the man I discovered beneath the formal arrangement that brought us together. That man would not sacrifice his integrity to avoid unpleasantness, nor would I wish him to." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a warming, as if ice long frozen had finally begun to thaw beneath spring's persistent touch. His hand rose to cup her cheek, the gentleness of the gesture at odds with the strength evident in his tall frame. "When did you become so essential to me?" he murmured, his voice rough with emotion that had long gone unexpressed. "This arrangement that began in duty has become something else entirely. Something I had not thought to find again, if indeed I ever truly knew it before." Maristel's heart quickened at his touch, at the naked vulnerability in his amber eyes. "And what is that something, Talion?" For a moment it seemed he might withdraw, might retreat behind the walls of propriety, and reserve that had protected him for so many years. Instead, he drew a breath that seemed to require all his courage. "Affection," he began, the word clearly insufficient for what he wished to express. "Admiration, a profound gratitude for your presence that has gradually transformed into love, Maristel. Against all expectation, against all prudence perhaps, I have come to love you." The confession hung in the air between them, momentous and fragile. Maristel felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness but from a joy so acute it bordered on pain. "Talion," she whispered, her own hand rising to cover his where it rested against her cheek. "I have loved you since the moment you offered me freedom instead of chains, since you showed me that duty need not exclude tenderness, that strength can exist alongside gentleness." His breath caught, his eyes widening with wonder and disbelief. Can it be possible that from such inauspicious beginnings, the most genuine of connections might form? She finished for him, smiling through her tears. "Why not? The copper leaf you gave me speaks of bonds formed through choice rather than obligation. We have chosen each other, Talion, day by day, moment by moment. That choice seems more meaningful than any arrangement made on our behalf." Something broke in his expression then, a final barrier giving way to an emotion too powerful to contain. With infinite care, he drew her closer, his intent clear in his eyes yet hesitant, as if offering her one last opportunity to withdraw. Maristel answered the unspoken question by rising onto her toes, her hands coming to rest against the solid warmth of his chest as she closed the remaining distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began with gentle reverence before deepening into something more urgent, more consuming, a recognition of all that had remained unspoken during their strange courtship, and a promise of all that might yet be discovered. When they finally parted, breathless and transformed, Talion rested his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face as if she were something infinitely precious. "My winter duke seems to have thawed completely," she observed with a smile that contained both joy and wonder. "Only for you," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Only with you." The intimate moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the library door. They stepped apart, though Talion's hand found hers, reluctant to surrender the connection they had finally acknowledged. At his command, the butler entered, his usually impassive features betraying unusual tension. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Miss Combe has arrived." He paused, his disapproval evident despite his professional demeanor. "She appears distressed and insists upon seeing you immediately." Talion and Maristel exchanged a glance of mutual understanding. The confrontation they had anticipated had arrived, though sooner than expected. "Show her in," Talion instructed, his fingers tightening fractionally around Maristel's. "The Duchess will remain." "As you wish, Your Grace." The butler withdrew, leaving them a moment of privacy before the impending storm. "Are you certain you wish to face this together?" Talion asked, his concern evident. "Larity at her most desperate may prove we are past the point where separation serves either of us," Maristel interrupted gently. "Whatever she brings, we shall meet it as one." The door opened once more to admit Lady Combe. Her usual immaculate appearance had given way to something wilder. Her hair loosened from its careful arrangement, her complexion pale beneath a feverish flush, her eyes bright with an emotion that might have been anger or fear, or some volatile combination of both. "You refused my men," she said without preamble, her voice brittle with tension. "A foolish choice, Talion." "Good evening, Leridae," he replied with pointed civility. "I see you've abandoned the pretense of social niceties entirely." "Niceties?" She laughed, the sound harsh and strained. "We are well beyond such trivialities. Your defiance has forced my hand. I have already sent copies of Reginald's most damning journals to the editors of 3 society papers. By tomorrow evening, all of London will be discussing the true circumstances of his death." Maristel felt Talion tense beside her, though his expression revealed nothing of his inner turmoil. "And what circumstances would those be, precisely? For I recall nothing in those papers that suggests anything beyond my brother's troubled state of mind." "Perhaps not explicitly," Leridae conceded, her composure fracturing further with each exchange. "But the implication is clear enough for those with eyes to see. His fear of your interference, his conviction that you sought to separate us for your own purposes." "His paranoia, you mean," Talion corrected her quietly. "His increasingly erratic behavior, fueled by drink and jealousy. The journals you so eagerly exploit reveal a man descending into darkness, Leridae, not evidence of the conspiracy you have constructed in your mind." "You always were skilled at reshaping truth to suit your purposes," she spat, her elegant facade crumbling entirely. "You wanted me for yourself. When Reginald claimed me first, you could not bear it. You turned him against me, poisoned his mind with doubts, and when he confronted me, I left him to his delusions, rather than engage with accusations born of inebriation and paranoia," Talion finished, his voice steady despite the pain evident in his eyes. "A decision I have regretted every day since, not because I bear guilt for his death, but because I failed to recognize how desperately he needed help, how far into shadows he had already fallen." Leridae stared at him, her breathing ragged, her composed beauty giving way to the raw wound that had festered beneath it for 15 years. "You destroyed my life," she whispered. "When he died, when the whispers began, you could have saved me with a word, with an offer. Instead, you retreated behind these walls and left me to face ruin alone. I offered you protection," Talion reminded her. "Financial support, a position abroad. Charity," she cried, the word tearing from her throat. "I wanted justice, recognition. The place that should have been mine had fate not intervened." "The place that is mine," Maristel said quietly, speaking for the first time since Leridae's entrance. "You sought not justice, but substitution, Miss Corm. Not recognition, but possession. The life you believe was stolen from you cannot be reclaimed through blackmail or vengeance." Leridae turned to her, eyes narrowing with bitter recognition. So the mouse has found her voice. How convenient for Talion to have acquired such a staunch defender in his arranged marriage. "Not arranged," Talion corrected, his gaze meeting Maristel's with a warmth that belied his reputation. "Begun in duty, perhaps, but continued by choice. A distinction you might consider, Leridae, before you destroy what remains of your own reputation in this misguided campaign." "My reputation?" Leridae laughed again, the sound bordering on hysteria. "What reputation remains to protect? I am already ruined in the eyes of society. What harm can come from bringing you down with me?" "The harm would be to yourself, not to us," Maristel replied with unexpected gentleness. "Vengeance consumes the vessel that contains it, Miss Corm. It has already taken 15 years of your life. Would you surrender what remains to this bitter pursuit?" Something flickered in Lerida's expression, a moment of clarity breaking through the haze of her obsession. She looked between them, noting perhaps for the first time the united front they presented, the subtle intimacy that had transformed their formal alliance into something genuine and unassailable. "You truly love him," she said to Maristel, wonder and disbelief mingling in her voice. "The Winter Duke, who drove his brother to despair and abandoned me to scandal. You have given him your heart." "I have given my heart to the man beneath that cruel title," Maristel corrected her. "To the man who bears others' burdens as his own, who offers freedom rather than demanding submission, who has carried guilt for tragedies he did not cause because his conscience permits nothing less." Leridae's gaze shifted to Talion, a new comprehension dawning in her eyes. "And you love her in return, genuinely, completely." "With all that I am," he confirmed simply, "a miracle I neither expected nor deserve, yet one I shall spend my life honoring." The admission seemed to strike Leridae with physical force. She swayed slightly, her hand seeking the support of a nearby chair, as the righteous anger that had sustained her for so long began to crumble beneath the weight of an inescapable truth. She had lost not just the past she had envisioned, but any hope of reclaiming it. "I have spent 15 years, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "constructing a narrative in which you were the villain of my tragedy. What am I to do if that story proves false? Who am I if not the woman wronged by the Duke of Northaven?" The question hung in the air, raw and honest in a way that her previous accusations had never been. For the first time, Maristel glimpsed the true tragedy of Leridae Corm. Not the scandal that had marked her youth, but the bitter narrative she had allowed to define her entire existence since. "You are whoever you choose to be," Maristel replied softly. "The past need not dictate your future, Leridae, not if you find the courage to release it." For a long moment silence reigned in the library. Then, with a visible effort, Leridae straightened her shoulders, gathering the remnants of her dignity around her like a cloak. "The letters to the newspapers," she said at last, her voice steadier, though still thick with emotion. "They have not yet been delivered. They await my final instruction at the posting house in the village." Talion's expression revealed nothing of the relief he must have felt at this revelation. "And what instruction do you intend to give?" Leridae looked between them once more, her gaze lingering on their clasped hands before rising to meet Talion's eyes with newfound clarity. "I believe," she said slowly, that some stories are better left untold, some ghosts best laid to rest. She drew a shuddering breath. I shall withdraw my letters, and then, I think, I shall leave England altogether. Paris has always held a certain appeal. You would abandon your campaign so readily? Talion asked, his tone carefully neutral, though his fingers tightened around Maristel's. Not readily, Leride corrected him, with a ghost of her former sharpness. Nothing about this surrender comes easily, but I find myself suddenly weary of carrying hatred as my constant companion. Perhaps it is time to discover who Leride Corm might become when not defined by a decades-old grievance. The admission, unexpected and profound, settled over the room like the first gentle snowfall of winter, cleansing, transformative, a blank page upon which new stories might yet be written. If you truly wish to begin anew, I would still honor my original offer, Talion said after a moment's consideration. Financial support for your establishment abroad, not as charity, Leride, but as acknowledgement of the pain my family's actions, however unintentional, caused you. Leride's laugh this time held no bitterness, only tired resignation. Ever the Honourable Duke. Very well, Talion. I shall accept your support this once, not as recompense, but as investment in a different future. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the latch to glance back at them. Take care of him, Lady Northaven. Beneath that frost lies a heart capable of remarkable warmth, as I believe you have discovered. I have, Maristel acknowledged quietly, and I shall treasure it accordingly. With a final nod, not quite a reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of a kind of peace, Leride departed, leaving behind the ghosts she had carried for too long and the vengeance that had consumed her youth. In the silence that followed, Talion drew Maristel into his arms, holding her as if she were the anchor that had saved him from a tempest long thought inescapable. It seems, he murmured against her hair, that the Winter Duke has met his thaw at last. Maristel smiled against the solid warmth of his chest, the copper-leaf pendant nestled between them like a promise finally fulfilled. Not thawed, my love, she corrected gently, simply awakened to spring. Summer arrived at Northaven Hall in a glorious procession of colour and light. The gardens bloomed with unprecedented splendour, as if nature itself celebrated the transformation that had taken place within the ancient stone walls. Preparations for the charity exhibition consumed the household, with servants polishing forgotten silver, restoring neglected artworks, and rendering every corner of the once sombre estate into a showcase worthy of public admiration. Maristel stood in the long gallery, supervising the arrangement of paintings that had spent decades shrouded in protective coverings. Sunlight streamed through newly cleaned windows, illuminating portraits of graced ancestors who seemed to regard the activity with varying degrees of aristocratic dismay. Lady Agatha appears particularly displeased with our endeavours, she observed to Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper who had overseen Northaven's domestic affairs for 30 years. I imagine public visitation was not a custom in her day. Lady Agatha wouldn't have approved of breathing if she thought it common practice, Your Grace, the older woman replied with unexpected humour, though I suspect she might have revised her opinions had she witnessed the changes of these past months. The changes extended far beyond the physical restoration of the estate. Northaven Hall, once silent as a mausoleum, now rang with purposeful activity and, increasingly, with laughter. Talion had emerged from his self-imposed isolation, engaging with tenants, corresponding with agricultural societies, and, most surprisingly to the long-time staff, displaying a warmth of manner that contradicted his notorious reputation. His Grace inquires whether you might join him in the conservatory when your duties permit, announced Barrows, appearing at Maristel's elbow with the dignified stealth peculiar to well-trained butlers. He mentioned something about a matter requiring your particular sensibilities. Thank you, Barrows. Please inform His Grace I shall attend him directly. Maristel smiled, noting the subtle approval in the butler's expression. The staff had observed the transformation of their employer's marriage from formal arrangement to genuine partnership with quiet satisfaction, their loyalty to the Duke extending naturally to the woman who had restored light to his life. The conservatory glowed emerald and gold in the afternoon sun, the air heavy with the scent of exotic blooms and damp earth. Talion stood beside the blue starflowers that had first drawn Maristel's admiration, his tall figure outlined against the glass and greenery. He turned at her approach, his amber eyes warming in a way that still sent her heart racing despite the intimacy they now shared. "There you are," he said, extending his hand to her. I feared Lady Agatha might have convinced you to abandon our scandalous enterprise. Maristelle laughed, placing her fingers in his. She did look rather forbidding, though not nearly so intimidating as the Winter Duke once appeared to a certain nervous bride. Ah, but that formidable gentleman has been thoroughly vanquished, I'm afraid. He drew her closer, his free hand coming to rest at her waist, with a familiarity that spoke of barriers long since fallen. Defeated by a copper leaf and the remarkable woman who wore it. Not defeated, she corrected gently, reaching up to touch his cheek, merely revealed in his true nature. His expression softened, the lingering traces of the austere aristocrat giving way to the man she had discovered beneath the frost. You always did see more clearly than most, my love. The endearment, once unimaginable from his lips, now flowed with natural ease. Their marriage, begun in duty and continued by choice, had blossomed into something neither had dared hope for during those first silent weeks of formal distance. You wish to consult me about some matter, she prompted, though she made no move to increase the space between them. Indeed. He guided her deeper into the conservatory, where a small table had been set with tea and delicate pastries. A question of some importance has arisen regarding the exhibition. Maristelle settled into the chair he held for her, noting the unusual tension in his movements. Has something gone awry? Lady Havisham's committee seemed satisfied with the arrangements during their last visit. Nothing has gone awry, precisely. He took the seat opposite her, his fingers drumming lightly against the table in an uncharacteristic display of nerves. Rather, an unexpected opportunity has presented itself, and I find myself uncertain of the proper course. She poured the tea, the familiar ritual steadying her own curiosity. I'm intrigued. What opportunity could fluster the Duke of Northaven so thoroughly? A letter arrived this morning from Paris. He withdrew an envelope from his coat, placing it carefully between them. From Leride. Maristelle's hand paused in the act of passing his cup, surprise momentarily overriding her composure. In the 3 months since Leride's departure, her name had rarely been mentioned, though they had received confirmation of her safe establishment in a respectable Parisian neighborhood. She writes with remarkable civility, Tallien continued, accepting the tea with a nod of thanks. She has, it seems, found a position as companion to an elderly countess with failing eyesight, but considerable influence in French society. The arrangement suits them both. Leride provides educated conversation and assistance with correspondence, while the Countess offers respectability and entree to circles that might otherwise have remained closed to her. I'm glad to hear it, Maristelle said sincerely. Despite all that transpired, I would not wish her continued unhappiness. Nor would I, though I would have understood if your sentiments were less generous. His amber eyes held hers with familiar warmth. It is that generosity of spirit, in fact, that makes me believe you are the best person to decide how to respond to her request. Request? Maristelle echoed, her curiosity deepening. Leride has discovered that her elderly charge possesses several botanical paintings of considerable artistic merit. The Countess wishes to contribute them to our exhibition with proceeds from their eventual sale to benefit the Foundling Hospital. He indicated the letter. Leride has offered to escort them personally, which would, of course, necessitate her return to Northaven, if only briefly. Maristelle absorbed this information in silence, considering its implications. The woman who had once threatened to destroy their reputation, who had orchestrated a campaign of whispers and veiled accusations, now sought permission to return to the very household she had targeted. So you're concerned about my reaction to her presence, she observed, meeting his gaze steadily. I am concerned about your comfort, he corrected gently. The exhibition was your vision, Maristelle. I would not have its success marred by the presence of someone who once caused you distress. The consideration behind his hesitation touched her deeply. Where once he might have decided such matters unilaterally, he now sought her counsel as an equal partner in their shared life. What would you prefer, Tallien? She asked, genuinely interested in his perspective. Setting aside concerns for my comfort, how do you feel about Leride's potential return? He considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. 3 months ago, I would have rejected the notion outright. The risk of disruption would have seemed too great, the wounds too fresh. He paused, his expression softening. But now, I find myself inclined toward clemency. If her letter represents a genuine desire for reconciliation, perhaps allowing it serves all parties better than continued estrangement. Maristelle nodded, unsurprised by his response. The man society had labeled the Winter Duke possessed a capacity for compassion that few had been permitted to witness. Then we are of one mind, as usual. I see no reason to refuse her request, provided she understands that her visit pertains strictly to the exhibition." Relief and admiration mingled in his expression. "You continue to astonish me with your grace, Maristel. Many women would harbor resentment towards someone who threatened their happiness, as Leredy once did. Resentment serves no purpose but to darken one's own heart," she replied simply. "Besides, I have everything Leredy once believed she wanted. North Haven, its duke, a place in society that values me for myself rather than merely for advantageous connections. To deny her this small opportunity for amends would be an act of pettiness unworthy of the position I now hold." Talion reached across the table to take her hand, his touch conveying emotions beyond the capacity of words to express. "How fortunate I am," he said softly. "That duty brought you to North Haven when all I had known before was obligation without joy. The fortune was mutual, I assure you." She turned her hand to interlace their fingers. "Though I suspect the household staff would claim the greatest benefit, Mrs. Winters remarked only yesterday that she had not seen the silver so thoroughly polished since before your father's time." His laughter, once so rare that servants would pause in their duties at the sound, filled the conservatory with warmth. "A household revolution indeed. Next, you'll have me hosting musicales and literary salons. Don't tempt me, Your Grace." Her smile held a teasing quality that reflected the easy intimacy they had established. "I've had my eye on that lovely grand piano gathering dust in the music room. Consider it yours to command, Duchess," he replied, his amber eyes alight with affection. "Along with anything else at North Haven that might bring you pleasure." The sincerity beneath his playful tone stirred her heart anew. "I have all I desire already, Talion. Though I wouldn't object to that walk through the rose garden you promised yesterday, before we were interrupted by Lady Havisham's unexpected visit. Your wish is my command." He rose, offering his arm with a courtly bow that contained a hint of self-deprecating humor. "Shall we brave the summer heat for the sake of horticultural appreciation?" "For that, and for the pleasure of your company," she replied, accepting his arm with a smile that spoke of contentment deeper than she had ever imagined possible when she first crossed the threshold of North Haven Hall. As they strolled through the sun-dappled gardens, discussing final preparations for the exhibition and exchanging observations about the estate's ongoing transformation, Maristel felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place. The marriage that had begun as a business arrangement, cold as a contract and formal as a legal document, had blossomed into a partnership of equals, warmed by genuine affection and strengthened by mutual respect. The copper leaf pendant still hung at her throat, no longer a symbol of freedom offered, but of connection freely chosen. And as Talion's hand covered hers where it rested in the crook of his arm, Maristel reflected that perhaps the most unexpected gift of their unconventional union had been the discovery that duty, when embraced with an open heart, could lead to the very happiness she had once believed it would preclude. The morning of the exhibition dawned clear and golden, as if even the notoriously fickle English weather had agreed to cooperate with the transformation of North Haven Hall. Carriages lined the winding drive, depositing elegantly attired guests onto gravel paths freshly raked for the occasion. Servants in newly commissioned livery directed visitors toward the main entrance, where the Duke and Duchess greeted each arrival with a warmth that belied the estate's formerly austere reputation. "Lady Pembroke, how delightful to see you," Maristel said, accepting the elderly countess's gloved hand. "I believe you'll find the portrait gallery particularly to your taste. We've uncovered several Gainsboroughs that have not been displayed in decades." "Splendid, my dear. Such a marvelous undertaking," Lady Pembroke enthused, her sharp eyes taking in the changes to the once forbidding estate. "I must say, North Haven has never looked more inviting. A testament to your influence, no doubt." "The Duchess has indeed brought new life to these ancient stones," Talion agreed, the pride in his voice unmistakable, "though I suspect the greatest transformation has occurred in its master rather than its halls." The candid admission, spoken within earshot of several prominent society figures, would have been unthinkable 6 months prior. Maristel felt a flush of pleasure warm her cheeks as Lady Pembroke's eyebrows rose in delighted surprise. "Well, the Winter Duke acknowledges the spring at last," the Countess declared with a knowing smile. "I shall tell everyone who cannot see for themselves. Much more interesting than old paintings, my dear Duke, though I shall admire those as well." As Lady Pembroke moved on, Talion leaned closer to murmur in Maristel's ear, "I believe I've just provided gossip fodder for the remainder of the season. A small price to pay for such a charming compliment, she replied, her eyes dancing with amusement, though the Winter Duke acknowledges the spring would make a rather poetic headline for the society pages. Better that than the headlines Leriday once threatened, he observed, his tone lightening as he nodded toward an approaching carriage. Speaking of whom, the elegant vehicle bearing the crest of Leriday's French patroness came to a halt before them. A footman opened the door, offering assistance to the woman who had once brought such turmoil to their household. Leriday descended with characteristic grace, though Maristelle immediately noted subtle changes in her appearance. Her gown, while fashionable, lacked the provocative edge that had once defined her style. Her hair was arranged in a simpler manner, and her expression as she approached held a composure that seemed genuine rather than calculated. "Your Grace, Lady Northaven," she greeted them with a formal curtsy. "Thank you for permitting my visit. The Countess de Vaudreuil sends her regards and her gratitude for including her modest contribution to your charitable endeavor." "We are pleased to welcome both you and the Countess's generous donation, Miss Combe," Talion replied with careful courtesy. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Quite, thank you." Her gaze moved between them, assessing the changes that 3 months had wrought. Northaven looked different than I recall. Brighter, somehow. "We've removed some of the heavier draperies and opened rooms that had been closed for years," Maristelle explained, maintaining the polite fiction that Leriday referred only to the physical appearance of the estate. "The gardens, particularly, have benefited from renewed attention." "I should like to see them if time permits," Leriday said, her tone revealing genuine interest rather than mere social nicety. "Paris has its charms, but I find myself missing English gardens on occasion." "You would be most welcome to tour them after the exhibition closes to the general public," Talion offered. "For now, perhaps you would allow Barrows to show you to the room we've prepared for the Countess's paintings. Several art enthusiasts have expressed interest in viewing them." "Of course." Leriday hesitated, an uncharacteristic uncertainty flickering across her features. "Before I go, I wish to say, that is, to express my—" She paused, visibly gathering her composure. "I am grateful for this opportunity. Not everyone would have extended such courtesy given our history." The simple acknowledgement, free from the bitterness that had once colored her every interaction, seemed to close a chapter that had remained partially open despite her departure. Maristelle felt Talion's slight relaxation beside her, a tension she hadn't fully realized he still carried, finally easing from his shoulders. "The past need not dictate the future, Miss Combe," Maristelle said softly, echoing the words she had spoken during their last confrontation. "For any of us." A genuine smile, perhaps the first Maristelle had ever witnessed from her, touched Leriday's lips. "Indeed, Lady Northaven, a lesson I am endeavoring to learn." She turned to Talion, her expression composed but sincere. "The Countess speaks often of renewal, of how winter's dormancy prepares the way for spring's rebirth. I believe she would find Northaven's transformation most appropriate." With that, she allowed Barrows to escort her toward the exhibition hall, leaving Talion and Maristelle in a moment of private understanding, despite the crowd surrounding them. "That," Talion observed quietly, "was unexpected." "Was it?" Maristelle's fingers found his, a brief touch of reassurance. "Or merely the natural conclusion to a story that had remained unresolved for too long?" Before he could respond, they were approached by Lord Havisham and several other prominent patrons, drawing them back into their duties as hosts. The day continued in a whirl of introductions, tours, and explanations of the various charitable initiatives that would benefit from the exhibition proceeds. By late afternoon, the success of the event was undeniable. Donations had exceeded expectations, several valuable paintings had been purchased for substantial sums, and society's approval of the Duke and Duchess of Northaven had been firmly cemented. As the last visitors departed, leaving only committee members and close acquaintances for the private supper to follow, Maristelle found herself momentarily alone in the long gallery. She stood before the portrait of Reginald Graced, studying the handsome, troubled face of the young man whose tragic end had cast such a long shadow over Northaven. The painting had been included in the exhibition at Talion's specific request, an acknowledgement rather than a concealment of painful history. "He would have been 40 this year," came Talion's voice as he joined her before the portrait. "I wonder sometimes what he might have become had he found the help he needed." "We cannot know," she replied gently, leaning against him as his arm encircled her waist. "But we can honor his memory by acknowledging both his struggles and the love you bore him, despite everything." "You've taught me that, you know," he said, his amber eyes reflecting the evening light as he turned to face her. "That love need not be perfect to be real. That acknowledgement of flaws does not diminish affection, but deepens it. "I believe we have taught each other many things," she countered with a smile, her hand rising to touch the copper leaf that still hung at her throat, "including the truth behind this token you gave me, that the strongest bonds form when each person remains free to choose their path." His hand covered hers where it rested on the pendant, warmth radiating from the simple contact. "And what path do you choose now, Maristel? Now that North Haven stands transformed, the exhibition a success, our position in society secure?" She considered the question, aware of the deeper inquiry beneath its surface. "I choose the path we walk together," she said simply, "whatever new challenges or joys it may bring." Something shifted in his expression, a certainty settling into place, a decision reached. Would those joys perhaps include— He hesitated, a rare vulnerability appearing in his usually confident demeanor. "Would you consider the possibility of expanding our family, of filling these halls with more than just guests and artifacts?" Maristel's breath caught, her heart surging with unexpected emotion. They had not yet discussed children, though the subject had hovered at the edges of her thoughts in recent weeks. The idea of a child, their child, brought forth a yearning she had scarcely allowed herself to acknowledge. "Talion," she whispered, searching his face for confirmation of his meaning, "are you asking if I would welcome a child?" "I am asking if you would welcome the attempt to create one," he clarified, his voice deepening with emotion. "Our marriage began in duty, evolved through choice and blossomed into love. It seems fitting that we might consider this next chapter, if you are willing." Joy welled within her, bright and overwhelming. "I am more than willing," she assured him, her arms encircling his neck as she rose on tiptoe to bring her face closer to his. "I would be honored to bear your children, to raise them in this home we have reclaimed from shadows, to teach them the value of both duty and choice." His smile, warm and unreserved, so different from the austere expression he had worn when she first arrived at North Haven, transformed his face into something approaching radiance. "Then perhaps," he suggested, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that promised deeper intimacy to come, "we might begin that particular endeavor sooner rather than later." "My Lord Duke," she replied with playful formality, though her eyes conveyed the depth of her genuine emotion, "I believe that is the most appealing invitation you have extended to me yet, and there have been many in recent months." Their laughter mingled in the gallery air, witnessed only by the portraits of graced ancestors who had never seen such unconstrained joy within these ancient walls. And as Talion drew Maristel closer for a kiss that contained both tenderness and passion, the last lingering chill of the Winter Duke's reign melted completely away, replaced by the vibrant warmth of a future limited only by the boundaries of their shared imagination. 5 years passed, each season bringing new transformations to North Haven Hall and its inhabitants. The estate that had once stood in somber isolation became a center of intellectual and philanthropic activity, its doors regularly opening to host agricultural forums, artistic exhibitions, and charitable gatherings. Society, which had long whispered of the Winter Duke's coldness, now spoke admiringly of the North Haven model of estate management and community engagement. On a golden autumn afternoon, Maristel stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens, watching as Talion led their 4-year-old daughter, Eleanor, through the intricate pathways of the rose garden. The child's laughter floated upward on the crisp air, a sound that never failed to warm Maristel's heart regardless of how often she heard it. Eleanor, named for Talion's mother, possessed her father's amber eyes and her mother's honey-gold hair, along with a spirit of curiosity and joy that transformed even the most ordinary days into adventures. "Higher, Papa," Eleanor commanded, her small arms raised in imperious demand. "I want to see all of North Haven," Talion obliged with exaggerated effort, lifting her onto his shoulders, where she perched like a triumphant explorer surveying newfound territory. "Is the view to your ladyship's satisfaction?" he inquired, his formal tone belied by the smile that had become a familiar feature of his once austere countenance. "I can see forever and ever," Eleanor declared, her hands gripping his hair with casual possessiveness. "And Mama, too. Mama, look how tall I am." Maristel waved, her other hand coming to rest protectively over the gentle swell of her abdomen where their second child grew. The pregnancy, confirmed just weeks earlier, remained their private joy for the moment, though soon they would share the news with Eleanor and the household. The thought of another child, perhaps a son with Talion's thoughtful nature, or another daughter with his quiet strength, filled her with anticipation tinged with the sweetest nostalgia for Eleanor's infancy. The family tableau was interrupted by the arrival of Barrows, who approached with the dignified bearing that had survived even Eleanor's determined attempts to make him smile at inappropriate moments. "A letter has arrived from Paris, Your Grace," he announced, presenting a silver tray bearing an envelope addressed in a familiar flowing script. "Shall I have it taken to the library?" "Thank you, Barrows, but I'll read it now." Maristelle accepted the letter, recognizing Lerida's handwriting immediately. In the years since the exhibition, their correspondence had evolved from formal politeness to something approaching genuine friendship, conducted primarily through letters and occasional gifts exchanged across the Channel. The transformation in Lerida had proven as remarkable as North Haven's own Renaissance. Following the death of her elderly patroness, who had left her a modest but comfortable inheritance, Lerida had established a small salon in Paris, catering to artistic expatriates and visiting intellectuals. Her connections in both French and English society made her an invaluable liaison for those seeking entree to continental cultural circles, and her name, once whispered in scandal, had gradually become associated with a sophisticated appreciation for emerging talents in literature and art. "News from Miss Corm?" Talion asked as he approached the terrace, Eleanor still enthroned upon his shoulders with regal satisfaction. "I trust she is well?" "We shall see," Maristelle replied, breaking the seal and unfolding the letter. Her eyes scanned the elegant script, a smile gradually spreading across her features. "Indeed, she appears to be more than well. She writes to inform us of her engagement to a French diplomat, a widower with 2 young children, whom she describes as thoughtful, cultured, and refreshingly straightforward after years of ornamental society men." "How wonderful," Talion said, and Maristelle knew he meant it sincerely. The bitterness that had once existed between him and Lerida had gradually dissolved through the alchemy of time and genuine change on both sides. "She deserves happiness. She has invited us to the wedding in the spring," Maristelle continued, looking up from the letter with a contemplative expression, "and she specifically mentions hoping to meet the little Duchess who features so prominently in my letters." Eleanor, recognizing herself in this description, bounced excitedly atop her father's shoulders. "Are we going on a boat, Mama, to see the lady who sends me the French dolls?" "Perhaps, my love," Maristelle laughed, reaching up to smooth her daughter's wind-blown curls, "though I suspect by spring we may have an additional traveller to consider." Talion's eyes widened slightly, comprehension dawning in their amber depths. "Maristelle, are you certain?" She nodded, joy illuminating her features. "Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday. We shall welcome our second child by early summer, if all progresses as expected." In a swift motion that elicited a squeal of delight from Eleanor, Talion swung the child from his shoulders and into the arms of a nearby nursemaid who had been discreetly monitoring their activities. Then he gathered Maristelle into an embrace that conveyed more eloquently than words the depth of his happiness. "Twice blessed," he murmured against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "When once I believed myself unworthy of even the simplest joys. Worthiness was never the question," she reminded him gently, drawing back to meet his gaze. "Only openness to possibility." His hand moved to cover hers, where it rested protectively over their unborn child. "A lesson I might never have learned without you, my love." They stood together in the autumn sunlight, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their shared vision, gardens restored to vibrant life, an estate reopened to community engagement, a household warmed by purpose and affection. The copper-leaf pendant still hung at Maristelle's throat, no longer a symbol of freedom offered, but of connection freely chosen, of the unexpected journey from obligation to love that had transformed not only their lives, but the very character of North Haven itself. From the gardens below, Eleanor's voice rose in song, a nursery rhyme about changing seasons that she had recently learned and performed with enthusiastic if imprecise pitch. The sound seemed to encapsulate everything they had built together: beauty emerging from winter's dormancy, joy from duty's constraints, harmony from disparate beginnings. "I received a letter from my father yesterday," Maristelle said after a moment, her tone reflective. "He writes that he has been invited to lecture at Cambridge on economic theory, a remarkable rehabilitation for a man once brought low by gambling debts. Your insistence on supporting his academic pursuits rather than enabling his former vices has proven wiser than many believed possible," Talion observed. "Another transformation to add to North Haven's growing list." "Transformation seems to be our particular talent," she agreed, leaning against him as they watched Eleanor chase a late butterfly across the lawn below. Though I wonder sometimes what might have happened had we not found our way to understanding. Had we remained in that formal, distant arrangement of our early days? I cannot imagine it, he admitted, his arm tightening around her waist. The Winter Duke seems as remote to me now as a character from some Gothic novel, familiar in outline but foreign in essence. Not entirely foreign, she corrected gently. The qualities that made you formidable then, your sense of duty, your profound conscience, your capacity for loyalty, are the same ones that make you remarkable now. The difference lies not in their existence, but in their expression. He smiled, acknowledging the truth in her observation. A generous interpretation, my love. A truthful one, she insisted. You were never truly the Winter Duke, Talion. You merely needed the right touch to awaken the warmth that had always existed within you. As if to illustrate her point, Eleanor broke away from her nursemaid and raced back toward the terrace, her face alight with the particular urgency of childhood discoveries. Papa, Mama, come quickly, I found a nest with baby birds and they're singing the most beautiful song. Talion laughed, the sound free and unrestrained, in a way that still occasionally surprised the older servants, who remembered his years of rigid self-containment. We shall be right there, my treasure. Lead the way to your discovery. As they followed their daughter's excited progress down the terrace steps, Maristelle felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her, a certainty that transcended mere happiness to touch something deeper and more enduring. The journey from duty to love had not been direct or simple, yet each step, even those that had seemed difficult or painful in the moment, had proven essential to creating the life they now shared. The copper pendant warmed against her skin as she walked beside Talion, their fingers intertwined with casual intimacy. Eleanor danced ahead of them, her small figure a physical manifestation of the joy their union had created. And within Maristelle, their second child grew steadily, another promise of the future taking shape in the present moment. Northaven Hall rose behind them, no longer the cold fortress of the Winter Duke, but a home in the truest sense, a place where duty and love had proven not opposing forces, but complementary strengths, where tears, once hidden, had given way to laughter freely shared, where a single touch had indeed awakened the warmth that transformed two separate lives into one shared journey of unexpected grace. As the autumn sun cast long golden shadows across the estate that had witnessed their transformation, Maristelle reflected that perhaps this was the greatest lesson of their unlikely love story, that beginnings matter far less than the choices made along the way, that duty embraced with an open heart can lead to the very joy it initially seems to preclude, and that even the coldest winter eventually yields to spring's persistent warmth, if only we have the courage to await its arrival with hope, rather than resignation. In the quiet chambers of duty, love often waits unrecognized. This is the profound truth that Talion and Maristelle's journey reveals to us, that obligations undertaken with integrity can transform into connections of extraordinary depth. Their story reminds us that the heart's awakening rarely follows the paths we expect or plan. We learn that true freedom is not the absence of commitment, but the presence of choice within it. The copper leaf pendant symbolizes this paradox perfectly, that in offering liberty, Talion created the very conditions where genuine bonds could form. How often in our own lives do we mistake constraint for protection, distance for dignity, solitude for strength? Their evolution teaches us that healing is rarely accomplished alone. The Winter Duke could not thaw himself. Maristelle's tears could not dry themselves. It was in their courageous vulnerability with each other, in those tentative moments of reaching across carefully maintained distances, that transformation became possible. Perhaps most poignantly, their story reminds us that our pasts need not determine our futures. Leride's journey from bitterness to renewal mirrors Northaven's own transformation, suggesting that even the deepest wounds can eventually heal when we choose to release our grip on grievances long nurtured. In a world that often celebrates passion without patience, their gradual discovery of love within the framework of duty offers a more enduring vision, one where affection built on foundation stones of respect and choice stands resilient against life's inevitable storms. May we all find the courage to recognize the Winter Dukes and hidden tears in our own lives, and the wisdom to understand that sometimes the most profound connections begin not with dramatic passion, but with a single intentional touch that awakens warmth where frost once reigned. Has a single moment ever changed the course of your heart? Did this tale of duty transformed by tenderness touch something within you? I'd love to hear which character's journey resonated most deeply with your own experiences. Was it Talion's thawing from isolation, Maristel's courage in vulnerability, or perhaps even Leridae's path from bitterness to renewal? Subscribe now to journey with more couples who discover love in unexpected circumstances, from arranged marriages that blossom into passionate devotion, to rivals whose antagonism conceals deeper connections waiting to be uncovered. Leave a comment sharing your favorite moment from Wed by Duty, and you'll be entered into our monthly drawing for a special Victorian-inspired gift basket, complete with your own copper leaf pendant, a beautiful reminder that freedom and love can coexist in perfect harmony. Until our paths cross in the next story, may you find warmth in unexpected places and beauty in duties embraced with an open heart.